So I just want to do a quick breakdown on why I thought that the Alberta provincial election ended up going the way it did. And from right off the bat, I'm just going to say that although a lot of conservatives out there are congratulating Danielle Smith on the win and basically kind of making it that it was because of her leadership and experience and wisdom that the UCP was able to pull it out against the NDP. I would take a completely different narrative from that and say that really this election was effectively lost by Rachel Notley. That it was Rachel Notley's election to win, and then she just failed to win by the end of it. I This is why, to a certain extent, and to a large extent, I guess, I didn't really like Danielle Smith during the leadership race. I didn't find her, even though she's good on radio, she's good at talking confidently. I don't find that she's the sort of person who projects a certain professionalism that's good in elections. She tends to be a little bit all over the place, and I understand that anyone in media, including myself, you're going to find tweets that where we're like wading into controversial issues that make us look bad out of context or different bad audio clips of us. I fully get that. I didn't quite agree with her feeling the need to go on podcasts with Vincent Byfield and talking to Artur Pawlowski and sort of engaging in what I would consider like the fringe of the anti-lockdown movement, the people who actually made the anti-lockdown movement and anti-mandate movement look bad. I thought that the UCP overall also was very clunky with its messaging. I think it had a few great moments where when it would go after the NDP on crime or when it would go after some of the anti-oil and gas NDP candidates, that was very good. At the same time, I thought that their message could get a little bit muddled. It felt like they were really like they had like 3 or 4 days where they were talking about Bill 6 as if anyone cared. I know Bill 6 is terrible and what the NDP tried to do to farming families by like effectively banning children from being able to work on their own family farms. But a lot of the time, I found that the UCP was maybe a little bit unfocused, I suppose, that they should have been, as soon as Danielle Smith became the premier, just been cutting taxes, showing how fiscally responsible they were, cracking down on crime, and then sort of throwing out a couple of election spending promises here and there, which every party has to do. I get it. Anyways, I want to move on to the NDP though, because Danielle Smith, all that stuff, all the UCP strategy, that was kind of baked into the cake. That the NDP was going into this election kind of knowing how the ground was already going to work. They already knew the pressure points that would probably work on voters, and they just failed to actually utilize that stuff effectively. And I want to make very clear up front. I hate the NDP. My opposition during the leadership race to Danielle Smith is because I do not believe that she's conservative enough, especially on social issues where she effectively agrees with the entire NDP's platform on that issue. Anyways, but with the NDP, it was a big combination between the worst messaging possible, going so negative that the benefit to going negative broke through to the other side, and then it just made Danielle Smith look good. Because when you make her out to be like effectively a demon, and then she gets up on stage and then is a completely normal, almost Redford like conservative, well, you look like a complete moron, and you're going to have a lot of the people who are PC voters who are on the fence, maybe going to vote NDP, going to realize, oh, these people are full of garbage, and so that they're either going to stay home and not vote NDP or move back and vote UCP because they did not really like Rachel Notley's terrible performance against a very normal looking Danielle Smith. So the messaging was bad in terms of the negativity, and the angle, I think a lot of people, like, that's the more generic reason why the NDP didn't do very well. It was too negative. It wasn't really connecting with voters. The secondary reason was that they ran terrible candidates. Everyone goes after the Republicans in the like down south, of course, in the 2022 midterm elections because they had really wacky candidates in some of these states where you really wanted a more moderate Republican. Same thing happened with the NDP. The NDP failed to win in Calgary East against Peter Singh because they ran Rosemond Valencia, who is a hyper-progressive who thinks Alberta's racist, while at the same time he goes to marches alongside Justice for Palestinians, which is effectively an anti-Semitic organization. And then at the same time, he's looking up to people like Angela Davis, who's like a race grifter, who also, again, is anti-Semitic and a member of the U.S. Communist Party and Black Panther Party. That's not a good candidate for Calgary East. You should be running someone who very much is from the community, knows a lot of people as a business owner, something like that. Rosemond Valencia had only moved to Alberta like 5 years ago from the Philippines. It was such a terrible candidate to run. So Peter Singh, even though you could maybe argue he had a couple of problems before this election, he was a community figure. That's why he won. Same thing with Mickey Amory. Mickey Amory for the UCP in Calgary Cross won because he is a community figure. He knows people, he engages. That's why he won. There were some vulnerable UCP candidates, mostly because of the name of Danielle Smith sort of getting in the way of some UCP candidates in places like Foothills for Jason Lawan and Bedding for Josephine Pond and Whitney Isaac in her riding down in South Calgary. But when you're running people like Drew Farrell, who frankly very few people liked on council in Calgary Bow, which is a more traditionally conservative riding, you and you're a race to win. It's your fault for running Drew Farrell there. Drew Farrell lost the NDP the election in Bow. Then like Roseman Valencia lost lost the race in Calgary East, and then you have a lot of these NDP candidates who were either in safe ridings and they got elected in Edmonton, or they were in rural ridings where they had no chance of winning, like that McTeague guy in Highwood. No, it wasn't Highwood. It was Chelsea Petrovic's riding, who was going off on about how terrible the oil and gas industry is and trying to compare oil and gas extraction to slavery and whatnot. They had a lady, Liana Pieva, up in Peace River, endorsing commune style living and talking about how capitalism is evil and socialism is fantastic. You had people like Rob La Jolla marching in front of communist parades and whatnot. You had other sort of people endorsing communism in one way or another. Diane Baden, who actually beat Tyler Shandro by 7 votes. But again, if you weren't running people like Diana Batten in that area, you probably would have won more ridings. You probably wouldn't have all these stupid scandals that you had to deal with. And I know a lot of people are going to say, well, the mainstream media didn't cover those, so it wasn't really going to affect anything. That's just a massive consolation to the fact that the media does not cover NDP scandals, but enough independent media like us at the National Telegraph, the Western Standard, True North, Counter Signal, we're all covering it, and we can reach those on the fence PC voters. Like organizations like Stop the NDP and whatever you think of them, Take Back Alberta, and then Alberta Proud. When they're highlighting all the crazy NDP candidates, you're going to have a lot of people on the fence who are either going to stay home or vote NDP come back to the UCP. Again, all these races in Calgary were super tight. And when it's a super tight race, it's usually not an issue with, do you like the UCP or the NDP better? I find voters in Alberta are pretty decisive on that issue. People didn't like Danielle Smith, but they generally liked the UCP brand. People do not like the NDP brand, but they generally found Rachel Notley at least somewhat likable until, the debate where she kind of looked like a bit of a fool. But when it's that close, it really becomes a character issue. Did the voters see that person in their community enough? Did they feel like their MLA actually represented them, or did they feel like they got elected and ran off into Edmonton? So character really matters in tight races. And when the NDP is dropping tight races in a city where the ridings are frankly primed for them to win, that's because they had horrible candidates who scared people. The NDP in their party constitution still states that they are a democratic socialist party. The thing is that they can do the we're a moderate party veneer for a little bit into an election, but as soon as people in independent media or even mainstream media, like Raheem Mohammed over at the National Post noted the democratic socialist thing, when people in mainstream and independent media start noting that the NDP kind of does have a little bit of a love for radical left-wing politics, you're going to have a problem. And again, you have people like Janice Irwin who are promoting extremely vulgar drag queen story hours in which the guy who's the queen at the event literally has his boyfriend's OnlyFans Twitter account linked on his own Twitter bio. These are the sort of people that the NDP are running. And yeah, of course, Janice Irwin's always going to win her seat back. But you cannot be surprised that when you have a Janice Irwin running in Edmonton, you're going to have some Calgary voters saying, I don't want that person becoming the Minister of Education or Child Services. That person is a little bit scary. So again, for the Alberta election, I thought that going into it, and I think we effectively saw it. I know that people are going to point at the popular vote and say, hey, well, the UCP won the popular vote 53%, and the seat count was 49 to 38. Okay, that's great and all, but it was a knife-edge election when it came to Calgary, and it really shouldn't have been. And it's because of I frankly think, the poor marketability of Danielle Smith as a candidate, and the fact that she kind of comes off as very right-wing, even though on a lot of social policy that she actually comes off as very center left to left. So she has this disconnect where some of the hardcore SoCons are not going to come out and vote for her, which is why you sort of get a little bit of these fringe independence parties that will pop up and get, 200, 300 votes. And those really do make the difference when ridings are coming down to 7 votes like in Acadia. You really do need all those votes. And then, of course, Danielle Smith's also alienating people who don't really like her statements on the radio and don't like her doing interviews with Vincent Byfield and talking about how people who are going along with mandates and lockdowns are kind of like people who followed Hitler. And I fully understand what her point there is. And it's like Jennifer Johnson when she compares transgender children to like feces and cookie dough. Like, as kind of gross as that is to say, I kind of get where she's going, but she is not articulating herself properly. And it's just like Smith, when she's on the radio, her goal is to keep viewers on the dial. So you say interesting and controversial things. That's completely fine. I understand that. It doesn't disqualify you from being the party leader for the UCP or the Premier of Alberta. I just think that there wasn't a good enough pivot. Like, the pivot at the debate was what probably saved her, is when she said, hey, I was just trying to be interesting on the radio. We're supposed to have interesting conversations, but now I'm serving Albertans. But it took so long for that to be said. If she said that right when she was running for the leadership or right after she won the leadership and became premier, I think the UCP would have gotten 55, 56% of the vote. And as silly as that sounds, like, well, does she really have to say that? Dude, there are so many people in politics who vote, who sit in the cheap seats, they need to be told the most obvious things ever in order to actually, not become completely unhinged about little out of context 5-second clips Danielle Smith said. But yeah, getting back to it, with all of that, with all of the kind of incompetence of the UCP's campaign overall, in terms of, like, I'm not saying the campaign itself, honestly, the 30-day campaign period wasn't that bad. It was the 7-month lead up of trying to market the arena deal is why you should vote for the UCP and kind of all these other high spending things, when they should have just been going back to bread and butter basics with tax cuts, cutting regulations, and cracking down on crime. They did that later on, but it was like a month or two before the election, where it can kind of be where people can pretend, well, it's too little too late. But again, the NDP offered nothing for any of those things. If Rachel Notley simply, didn't oppose involuntary drug treatment, probably would have pulled out a couple of more Calgary ridings. If she didn't back Safe Supply when she was in the legislature, probably would have been premier right now. If she did literally anything to address actual significant issues in Alberta, rather than doing the Jagmeet Singh thing and just throwing money out of her pockets and pretending like we can beat inflation by spending more, she would have won. But the thing is that she provided no answers to any of these things, and effectively just let her party's current popularity going into the election stagnate the entire time. And then she just lost at the end because effectively she provided no evidence that she would be she would significantly improve anything in the province. But I guess that's my take. People can disagree with it. I'll probably make more videos over the next week or two discussing my opinions on this. Hopefully this wasn't too rambling. But again, the Alberta election was a mess, so I'm okay with this video also being a mess.